So much happening. Some of the stories we're watching include new developments emerging from Maricopa County, Arizona's 2020 election audit. Arizona Representative Mark Finchem will join us in a few minutes. He's going to fill us in on what we're finding there. A rain of Hamas missiles falling on Israel continues, and Israel is responding in kind. We'll bring you the latest from that region, and gas shortages have popped up in the aftermath of a cyber attack on a vital pipeline in the eastern United States. We're going to give you some new information concerning that a little later in the program. We're going to have Victory News contributor John Graves on to discuss these and other stories we're going to cover today. Right now, let's go to Mike Garofalo with today's top stories. Mike?
Greg, here's the latest out of the Middle East. Israel carried out waves of retaliatory airstrikes in Gaza today, sending plumes of smoke rising into the air. That was this morning. The Israeli military says the airstrikes have struck around 600 targets inside Gaza. At the same time, Gaza militants continue to bombard Israel with nonstop rocket fire into early today. The attacks brought to life a standstill in southern communities near Gaza, but also reached as far north as Tel Aviv. And this morning, Israel reportedly has infantry troops along the Gaza border for a possible ground invasion as the military launched additional attacks. And signals sent by the Biden administration may have allowed the Palestinian terror group Hamas to feel it could attack Israel, and the United States would not come to its allies' aid. That is what it seems both former President Donald Trump and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are saying. Now, in his statement, Donald Trump said, quote, "When I was in office, we were known as the peace presidency because Israel's adversaries knew that the United States stood strongly with Israel and there would be a swift retribution if Israel was attacked." However, Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Andre Carson of Indiana, and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, all Democrats, issued a joint statement on Monday saying they are horrified by the violent assault by Israeli forces on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the continued violent attacks on the Palestinian people. Their statement failed to mention that Hamas started the escalation of conflict by firing rockets into Israeli territory from the Gaza Strip. And some good news. The Colonial Pipeline restarted operations Wednesday evening after a ransomware attack last week forced the entire system offline. The company did warn, however, that its pipeline would not be fully functional immediately, and we're just learning today. The New York Post is reporting that Bloomberg News has learned that a ransom of $5 million was reportedly paid at the end of last week or over the weekend, shortly after that cyber attack happened to this group called the Darkside. $5 million reportedly paid at the end of last week, a ransomware demand. And most of the pipeline, which is the largest fuel transmission line from the Gulf Coast to the Northeast, has been offline since Friday. Now, the company shut down its systems as a proactive measure, of course, after it fell victim to that ransomware attack by the group known as the Darkside. Greg, back to you.
Mike, thank you so much. I want to welcome attorney and Victory News contributor John Graves. John, let's start with Israel. I think what the president needs to do is come out and condemn it. Iran needs to hear him condemn what President Trump said about being the peace president. It's true. The facts back that up. Your thoughts?
It's not only true, Greg, I agree with you, but part of this is we now are talking about how to fix the problem that's now escalated and could get really, really ugly over there. The whole thing could have been avoided if we had a stronger position at the inception of this. We are called by God to stand with Israel. Believers across this country need to do that. We need to pray for the peace of Israel, but we need to stand with them as their allies in this nation. And the signal has been to, according to the former Secretary of State Pompeo, it's been so weak that kind of emboldens your enemies. It's no different than the pipeline, Greg.
Right.
When you're weak, when you pay ransom.
And that's what I wanted to go to. We started paying money to Hamas again, or to Gaza, the Palestinians. We started negotiations with Iran. Iran sent boats towards our Navy vessels that had to do warning shots. And then you have what's happening here in the United States. Inflation is happening. 4% of your dollar of your pay has been cut now since this guy's been president. And now we have the gas shortages, and they paid ransom for it. That sends a signal, doesn't it?
Yeah, dominoes. Bad policy equals bad practice and bad effects on everybody in this country. And so, by paying the dark side, that's not lost on any of us. By paying them, it's now open season on infrastructure. Hey, attack us, hack us, bomb us, whatever. We'll bow down and go pay you money just to get back to something else. Who wins in that world? You don't pay the thief who breaks into your house. You don't negotiate with a terrorist. And when you do, you invite more and more thieves and evil people to come destroy your country, your infrastructure. All the while, the radical left is going to do the typical thing. Let's just throw more money at it. Right. Let's give $4 trillion to infrastructure. That's their answer for everything. Just throw money at it.
And we'll form a commission. They just need to call that guy on TV that fights ransomware. I forgot the name of the company. Tim, back to you.
Greg, the life of a Border Patrol agent has changed significantly from just 5 months ago. The massive surge at the border with Mexico means more time processing and taking care of illegal immigrants. And that's not all. According to the Washington Times, in sectors like the Del Rio, Texas sector, assaults on agents have doubled compared to last year. And high-speed chases, they're much more common now, up 40%. But perhaps the most alarming statistic in arrest of migrants is the sex offender records. They are up 2,500% in the Del Rio sector. As you would imagine, more border crossings means more trash. Both agents and some National Guard troops end up cleaning up much of that mess. Greg?
Back to Arizona, the Maricopa County, Arizona election audit has been plodding forward at a slower pace than was hoped for. Things are about to come to a screeching halt, however, for about a week due to other events that are taking place in the venue where the audit is now taking place. But late yesterday, a tweet was posted that seemed to indicate some files were deleted prior to the audit beginning. This is starting to sound familiar. Arizona State Representative Mark Finchem joins us to share more insight on what was discovered.
We now have sufficient evidence to tell us that there's a serious problem here, Houston. So there's three main things that happened yesterday. All of them are summarized in a letter from President Karen Fann. The scrutiny, the focus, if you will, on routers. We got a letter from Sheriff Paul Penzone, who is the Maricopa County Sheriff, Democrat, who said, well, you know, we're very concerned about our routers and the fact that law enforcement information could be released that is sensitive. Of course, we came back with the question, well, all right, under NCIC, which is the National Crime Information Center regulations, that's supposed to be on a secured server, and it's not supposed to be commingled with any other information. So if you've done that, that speaks to a breach in your security, Sheriff. It certainly is not a problem for us to deal with. Secondly, we are looking at the idea that ballots, the number of ballots, the ballot count in a box, in a number of boxes, is off by as much as 17%. That's a big number when you try to compare the number of ballots in a box with the tally sheet that is also in the box. Bags that hold the ballots, quite frankly, they're to protect the ballots. They were supposed to be sealed. In many cases, the seals have been broken and placed in the bottom of the box. We're not quite sure what is up with that. And then finally, maybe one of the most disturbing things is a week before the machines were delivered to the Veterans Coliseum for the inspection and examination, data files were erased. Okay, you have now just gone down the path where we were assuming that there could be incompetence. We are now moving in the direction of criminality. That is a crime to eliminate voting records prior to 22 months after the election. So President Karen Fann wrote a letter to the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, who, by the way, on December 14th, about 24 minutes into the hearing on that date, said that we believe in a forensic audit. We want to support you. We want to have transparency. Well, now it appears that they have anything but those kinds of intentions.
Okay, I want to ask you this: how far along are you? Because you're going to stop here and be off for a week. How far along are you? And then what is the chain of custody for all of this stuff this next week?
Well, the chain of custody will be protected as it can be, since we, meaning the Senate and the audit team, received the ballots and all of the information that is pertaining to them. They're moving off of the floor because we have a couple of graduations that the Coliseum was under contract for. I do know that there is a contingency plan. I don't know what that contingency plan is, but they are going to move forward expeditiously. I don't know if that means that they are going to continue counting in another location or what that looks like, but I know that they are moving as quickly as they can to wrap up this piece of the audit.
Okay, I thank you so much. Routers, ballot counts off by 17%. I think that's greater than the margin in the election, and weeks before data files were erased. Very troubling indeed. Thank you, Mark, for the information that you brought us and for the access that you gave us while we were there in Arizona. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Mike?
Greg, the legitimacy of the 2020 election is being called into question along with Joe Biden's ability to lead. It's according to a letter signed by more than 120 retired generals and admirals. In part, that letter says the country has taken a hard left turn toward Marxism and socialism. It goes on to say, quote, aside from the election, the current administration has launched a full-blown assault on our constitutional rights in a dictatorial manner, bypassing the Congress with more than 50 executive orders. It urges all citizens to get involved now at the local, state, and or national level to elect political representatives who will act to save America, our constitutional republic, and hold those currently in office accountable. The will of the people must be heard and followed. The 5-page letter indicates it is from a group called Flag Officers for America. Well, for the entirety of his campaign and much of his presidency, Joe Biden has meticulously crafted a bipartisan image, but cracks are beginning to show. 4 months, the president's team has worked to keep Joe Biden far left tendencies under wraps, now hoping to cash in on the political benefits of a controlled bipartisan narrative, if you will. But thanks to a Biden gaffe where the president called the situation on the border what it is, a crisis, Joe Biden's true colors are actually beginning to show, we're told. Now, according to unnamed sources that are close to the Biden administration, the president is far more left-leaning than he leads on, and his team keeps the president away from the media to keep that a secret. And if you're not quite sure how the public reacted to Joe Biden's first 100 days, in a moment, we'll look at how his second 100 days started. As for the first, it involved executive orders that killed the Keystone XL pipeline, construction of the border wall, along with suspending new leases for oil and gas drilling on federal land, all policies that will clearly result in significant job losses. As for Joe Biden's second 100 days, well, where do we start? From rockets resulting in death and destruction in the Middle East, inflation on the rise, we are told, a border crisis that shows no signs of letting up, and a record number of job openings. And the reason some jobs aren't being filled, unemployment compensation is too good. Why work when people will make about the same from unemployment checks? And don't forget the ransomware attack that just happened involving the Colonial Pipeline, which has led to the disruption of gas supplies in more than 10 states. Reports show that in Virginia and Georgia, almost half of the gas stations were out of fuel. Well, the CDC is reporting more blood clot cases have been linked to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Now, there have now been more than 24 cases reported, with that number expected to continue to rise. Most of the cases were among women aged 18 to 49. Only 6 of the clotting events identified were in men. On Wednesday, the CDC said that the events appear similar to what is being observed following the administration of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine in Europe. Tim, I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, Mike, we have more on the CDC. Joe Biden and the aforementioned CDC are urging all kids aged 12 and older to get Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine.
I encourage each of them and their parents to get their vaccination shots right away. And here's why. We know that kids at this age, 12 and above, are at risk from COVID-19. About 3 million COVID-19 cases have been reported in kids under 17 years of age. And teenagers can spread it to their friends, to their siblings, to their parents, and to their grandparents. Now, that vaccine is authorized for ages 12 and up. And I encourage their parents to make sure they get the shot.
Early in the week, the FDA cleared the expanded use of Pfizer shots for 12 to 15-year-olds, as well as those who are 16 and older. but much of the nation was awaiting the recommendation of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. On Wednesday, an independent advisory committee voted to recommend its use. Greg?
John Graves, let me bring you back in here. We've decided to close another pipeline down. And now we've got new information about a vaccine. On the vaccine, I remember when I was a kid, we were raised say no to drugs, don't experiment with drugs, and now we're being peer pressured to experiment with drugs. John?
And not just peer pressure to experiment with drugs, but peer pressure to push them on our children or get our children to do it. I don't know if you saw the story in Ohio where they're offering $1 million like lottery system for people to go get the vaccine, for kids to get it. More people have died from this vaccine. People need to hear God. We've said this on this network over and over. You do what God tells you to do, but you should have the freedom to choose to get it and the freedom to choose not to get it instead of this being pushed down.
John, I'll tell you on a personal level, when my kids were in school, they're grown now, but we chose not to get vaccinations of any kind for our children. And if they were still young, I would refuse to get this one as well. And I just can't imagine why the government, why Joe Biden stands there and says and gives numbers that really aren't true about kids getting this and spreading this and being in danger. They're the least susceptible to this thing, and they're the least in danger of actually dying from it.
To me, that's a good point, Tim. To me, what you do is you pull back and go, what spiritually is happening here? If you keep people afraid, what do you get to do? You get to take away their liberties. You get to take away their freedoms. You get to have government control over human freedoms. This country was founded from people escaping government obsessive control over their lives, over their religious freedom, over their ability to worship. And that's exactly what's happening here. The more you can keep the fear going, the more that stops. And look at the infrastructure. We just had 3 stories where the Keystone Pipeline was shut down by the president by executive order on the first day. We're now paying ransom to terrorists who hacked the thing. And then we've got policies where people are just looking for reasons to shut it down. Why? Because it creates a crisis that we can then justify throwing more money at. So always step back from the surface and perceive what is happening underneath.
You just said it just a second ago, fear. The government wants you to fear because they want to be your savior. Jesus said,
right.
Fear not, because he is your savior. John?
That's right. That's exactly right. And all the way through history, look what's happened in Israel. People of faith have always suffered persecution. So we have to step back and go, we've gotten a little comfortable in this country. That comfort is now being yanked away. It's almost like waking up in a different country over the last 6 months. And the trend is not just, it's the same thing that in the story we just covered. We have a president that pretends to be bipartisan, that pretends to be down the middle, that's doing the most radical left things that have ever been done in this country, ever in the history of this country. So again, don't listen to what people say or what they look like or what they want you to be distracted by. Look at what the real motive, what the root issue, and what's actually being produced. The fruit.
I hear what he
That's
says.
how we judge things.
I hear what he says, but I'm looking at things with my eyes, and what I'm seeing doesn't match what he's saying. Yep. Very true. Mike?
Yeah.
Well, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi hailed Wednesday's White House meeting on infrastructure featuring mayors from Los Angeles, Kansas City, and Richmond as positive.
Well, again, the president has his vision. Congress will work its will. But I feel very optimistic. In any event, I felt optimistic about our ability to pass such a bill. I'm more optimistic now about being able to do so in a bipartisan way. But we'll see.
Despite sharing pleasantries at the White House, Republican congressional leader signals no willingness Wednesday to embrace President Joe Biden's ideas for a massive infrastructure investment, insisting instead on a much smaller package and rejecting the idea of raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy to pay for it. And Joe Biden hosted top 4 congressional leaders for the first time and said in the Oval Office session that he was willing to compromise on his $4 trillion jobs and families proposals. A bridge that crosses the mighty Mississippi River connecting Arkansas with Tennessee is now closed. A routine inspection on Tuesday found a crack in one of the bridge trusses. In addition to Interstate 40 being closed that connects Memphis, Tennessee and West Memphis, Arkansas, the Coast Guard has even decided to close the Mississippi River and stop boat traffic until that crack is inspected further. The Tennessee Department of Transportation says inspections are still underway and may take a couple of weeks, we are told, to complete. In the meantime, it is urging motorists to use an alternate route around there. Greg, I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, John Graves, let me bring you back in here. As I listen to all these things, it's so easy for people, if you stay in your head, to get overwhelmed by this. We give you the information so that you'll take action, you'll get involved in your communities, so that you'll pray. But this is really a time I'm beginning to see that we lift up our heads because our redemption's drawing nigh. Your thoughts?
That's great. I love the way you say that. You've got to be like Caleb and Joshua. When everybody else is giving a bad report, when everybody else looks at all the big giants in the land, when everybody looks at how hard things are going to be to take what God promised you, the freedom God promised you, the prosperity God promised you, you have to have a different spirit like Caleb and Joshua did. I want to go back to the voter fraud. That's a perfect classic. Mark Finchem and a whole group of people are fighting for the truth. And there's all this other stuff swirling around. But 3.3 million people voted for the President of the United States in Arizona. Less than, right at 10,000 votes decided that. Less than half of 1%. It's people like Representative Mark Finchem. It's people like you praying out there. It's people like us that won't stop to find the truth and don't get discouraged just because some big giant is in the land. God can take down big giants with very small stones if we believe in Him and walk in faith with Him. And so that's what our listeners got to stay focused on.
Right. You mentioned that the ballot count is off by 17% in that election account.
Yeah.
That covers the distance.
That's not just fraud. Yeah, it's not just fraud. It's not just irregularities. People use that as a buzzword because they don't want to ever say the word and get deplatformed. But just be truthful. Just speak the truth and let the consequences be what they are. If it's off by 17%, the election was decided by less than half of 1%, then what we have to do is stay focused in faith. If the truth is there was no fraud, then we should know that. And both sides should want that. That's what we should all seek. You seek the truth, you'll find it.
That's absolutely true. And the truth will set you free. That's what the scripture says.
Right.
So
Yes.
This is a shining moment for America. This is the time of the great when we're going to reset our spirituality, just like they did in England with Brexit. That's what we're doing here. This is a great time to celebrate. Thank you, John Graves, for what you bring. Million Voices. Go to that website.